In today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast, I bring back my former high school basketball coach to talk with us about the future of the Pistons, some of my opinions from back in the day, and also pick his brain about what's it like to coach in 6-7 years ago when I was his player to now. What kind of things have changed in coaching just through those years in the game of basketball? We'll talk about all that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Johnson with 1 second to go.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to our YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to support the podcast. We're on our way to 5,000 subscribers. Or if one of the many people who are going to be listening to this on the podcast platforms, go to the bottom of whatever podcast platform you listen to this on, leave us a 5-star review. That's another great way to support the podcast. So if you've missed any of the podcasts over this past week, we've had a ton of guests on. I encourage you guys to go back and check out all the podcasts this past week. We had a Houston Rockets member on the podcast. We had a former broadcaster and sideline reporter for Fox Sports Detroit, Ryan Field, on the podcast yesterday. And today we're going to be bringing on my former high school basketball coach, Corey Smith, or how I call him, Coach Smith to this day. How you doing, Coach?
Doing great, Koo. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. Love talking basketball with you as we always have.
Yeah, we go back. We go back all the way to 2013. It's almost a decade now since you coached me. It's crazy. So let's go ahead and go back to 2013. So back then, obviously the Detroit Pistons, their core was Andre Drummond. Reggie Jackson wasn't acquired yet. It was 2015, but I was still at school, so you were still around. Yeah, Greg Monroe, Josh Smith, Brandon Jennings. How do you feel about how, obviously that's a long time ago, but even still, Andre Drummond was just traded from the Pistons 3 years ago. They had, I believe Stan Van Gundy was still around at that point too. So it wasn't that long ago where these guys were around, just 3 years ago. Troy Weaver comes in. He's completely flipped the roster on its face. And now it seems like in just 2 years with Troy Weaver, he's completely flipped this roster, giving the city of Detroit and its fan base a breath of fresh air and have them extremely excited for the future. How do you feel about where they are now versus where they were in Andre Drummond's second year when I was playing under you?
Yeah, I think, first off, I love what Troy Weaver has done. I don't love absolutely every move he's done, but, the concept, the ability, the thinking short term with the long-term vision is incredible, freeing up the books while also having a vision long-term. And just watching around the league, I think few GMs, whether it works out or not, obviously depends on, his eye for talent, which is why he was brought in. But, few GMs have been able to do what he has been able to do in such a short time. When he picked up and, here, they had one of the worst books in the NBA. And, next offseason, they're going to have one of the best, all with young talent. Now, if you go back to 2013, the Pistons got stuck from the end of the Dumars era on just kind of middling on. They had a great run. They didn't want to end it. They had some opportunities after, losing to San Antonio, then losing to Miami. Joe Dumars said, their famous line, the older Pistons fans, I don't know if you know this, there are no sacred cows. That's the line after they lost to Miami in 2006. And then in 2006-07, he brought back the same team. And, Dumars' reign lasted a lot longer, but that is when things started for me. And you can see it's a straight line down. They got caught in this. I just want to put a winning team out there. And they would stretch in, and then it didn't go well. And then they got in that Ben Gordon, Charlie Villanueva. And then they got some draft luck. Greg Monroe was a decent NBA player. Andre Drummond, I have never been a fan, as you know. But he was a decent talent, he's not a winning basketball player. But I see pieces now that are winning basketball players, if everything is done right.
All right. So what would you say? And I did not know that quote. I didn't. I was too young for that. I do remember them losing, but I don't remember that quote. That's interesting. So what would you say though? Is it just the fact that, like how you mentioned, he has a short-term vision while also thinking about the long term as well? what would you say is the main difference with how you've seen Troy Weaver operate in his just 2 years with the Pistons versus the end of the Dumars era and the Stan Van Gundy era? Is it really just simply, if we're going to lose, let's just bottom out kind of thing, and then I'll take the best talent I can find at the top of the draft? Is it just that simple, or do you see some other things that are like kind of different from how things were operating at that time?
I think it's a very different vision. And that is, Dumars had the success, and so he wanted to keep that going. Stan Van Gundy was given the keys to the house and coach, and I don't think that works out very often. Greg Popovich obviously has done it remarkably well, but when your job's on the line as a coach, all of a sudden you make rash decisions, aka Blake Griffin trade. But Troy Weaver's come in and he had a vision, and that is, one, clean up the books, two, get talent on the team. And so, a lot of the moves he made, even like the Bruce Brown trade, Bruce Brown's a good, solid NBA player. Is he a game changer? Certainly not for where the Pistons are, in my opinion, currently. If you had a Bruce Brown type player 5 years from now, he probably is a type of player you would want, but his window was outside of that. Troy Weaver, what I mean by a short-term vision with a long-term plan is he's getting veterans in. Corey Joseph, I'm sure most of your Piston fans or listeners, he's not their favorite player.
He's definitely not, but
okay,
I get where you're about to go here, though.
But what is Corey Joseph? One, he's a serviceable NBA player, not going to win them, and he's a great locker room presence. At least, from an outsider's perspective, that's what they say. And so you got these young guys. He can give you serviceable NBA minutes and bring up these young guys and teach them how to be an NBA player. And that's something that's huge. I was just reading, these teal jerseys came out, and I was reading a quote from Jerry Stackhouse, and he was talked about how he came up with the 76ers, and there were a bunch of young guys who didn't know anything about the NBA. And then when he was traded to the Pistons, Joe Dumars was still around. Rick Mahorn was still around, and he learned how to be a pro. And that's when Jerry Stackhouse's career really exploded. He was a decent player. Then he became an all-star when he learned how to be a pro. And I think that's what Troy Weaver's doing with these short-term contracts that allow flexibility as well as growth for his young players.
Oh, yeah, and we've talked about that on the podcast before. I mean, not just Corey Joseph, but you could also kind of say the same thing a little bit about Jeremy Grant. He ended up being able to flip him for some good assets. Obviously, in a long-winded way, it basically turned into Jalen Duren and some expiring contracts this year. I was able to buy out Kemba Walker, but you get the idea. Also, Mason Plumlee and Killian's rookie season, and Isaiah Stewart's rookie season, and Sadiq Bey's rookie season. I completely agree with what you said. I've been talking about that for a minute. I feel like a lot of people in the Pistons community has mentioned that he's done a good job. And I think last year they struggled a little bit more with doing this, but I think the first season they did a really good job with this, of putting a competent team out there, a team that's not going to win, but a team that has competent veterans, guys who know how to play. So when you're on the floor, you can at least run a competent offense. You can run a competent defense, and guys can teach younger guys how to play. I think that's a good thing. I think he's been trying to do that. I think for the most part, he has succeeded at that. And heading into this third season with him, and obviously Cade's second season, we'll talk about Cade when we come back, but heading into this third season, I think he still has that. I mean, he got Jalen Duren in the draft, Isaiah Stewart coming back, but he maintains Kelly Olynyk and Nerlens Noel, two guys that can kind of show these guys the way, be mentors to these guys. Still have Corey Joseph. Outside of that, they are pretty young, but they still have some nice veterans for their positions at the guard spot with Corey Joseph, and the big guy position with Nerlens Noel and Kelly Olynyk. I think he has done a good job at that, and also accumulating young talent in a way that I don't know we've seen like really done before. I mean, I'm sure someone could probably, an historian could probably find somebody, but this is pretty crazy how he has, in just 2 years completely, there's not a single player on the roster that was here when he took over the job 2 years ago. All these guys are new. He's completely flipped it, and they're in a better spot just 2 years later. Now, obviously, that had a lot to do with the ping pong balls and getting lucky for Cade Cunningham. But outside of that, he's been aggressive. He went up and got Sadiq Bey. He went up and got Isaiah Stewart. He went up and got Jalen Duren. So he's done a good job, and I think definitely Pistons fans are happy to have a GM who, like you said, has a short-term vision with a long-term plan. I think that's a great way to look at it. And I think a lot of fans obviously love Troy Weaver and what he's done, and that's just a great way of looking at it. So when we come back, we'll talk about Cade Cunningham and why Cade Cunningham should make things a lot more easier than what it was back in the earlier days in the earlier 2010s, late 2000s of trying to rebuild the team. Why Cade makes that a lot easier for Troy Weaver and the rest of the Detroit Pistons. But first, I have to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your sports betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for our sports wagering information. From live in-game betting to scores and podcasts, they have you absolutely covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about their trends and action today. And if you go over to their website right now, you'll see that they already have their odds to win the next season's NBA championship. And I don't know if I agree with these odds. They got the Boston Celtics at plus 400 to win the championship. I don't know if that's because of the new KD rumors that they might be acquiring KD. But I don't know, man. Putting them above the Bucks at 625, don't know if I can get along with that. But that's the kind of thing you can do over at BetOnline.net. Again, make sure you head to their website or use your mobile device to learn more about their trends and action today. BetOnline, where the game starts. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to our YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to support the podcast. Or if you listen to this on one of the podcast platforms, go to the bottom of whatever podcast platform you are listening to this to and leave us a 5-star review. Both those are great ways to support the podcast. And before we get back into the talk, I do want to tell you guys again, we have found the fan who I'm going to be bringing on for this week's version of A Fan Joins the Show series that we've started this offseason. It should be posted Saturday morning, so you guys stay tuned for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. But anyways, Coach Smith, Cade Cunningham, back when I was, you were coaching me, Andre Drummond again was the Pistons franchise player. And then after Andre Drummond, it turned into Blake Griffin with the Blake Griffin trade. And Blake Griffin may have had his best season ever with the Pistons in that 18-19 season, but he just fell apart. And that only lasted a year, and really only how many games did he play? 70 games that year. That's how long that lasted. So they've went from 2008, I would say, since they traded Chauncey, until 2021, when they got Cade Cunningham, of not having a legit franchise player. And it seems like now, 14 years later, 13 years later, they finally have a guy that they feel very confident about moving forward with as the face of the franchise, as the face of the city. Are you that confident in Cade Cunningham being the face of the franchise? Do you feel as confident as what many Pistons fans feel, or do you feel that they maybe don't have that guy yet? Do you think Cade is actually the dude to take them to a championship level?
I love Cade Cunningham, love his game. I don't see him. Do I think he's going to take you to championship? I think if you build around him, he can. Is he going to be the dominant force that a LeBron James or a Kevin Durant are? I don't necessarily see that. But his ability to play with literally anybody, I think, to me, he reminds me of a little bit smarter, a little bit less athletic Grant Hill. Grant Hill was, I don't mean that Grant Hill wasn't smart. I think Cade plays with a little more pace. He doesn't have the athleticism that Grant Hill does, but they do both kind of operate from that. Cade's going to be a point guard, but that point forward spot, very similar. And so I see a lot of that. And had Grant Hill not gotten hurt, that his whole career looks a lot different. And so to me, I see that, and you pair the right people with him, I think you have a franchise player. Let me ask you this. Would you rather be the Pistons with Cade Cunningham or the Pelicans with Zion Williamson?
I think it's Pistons with Cade.
I completely agree. To me, Cade Cunningham is going to have a tremendously long, productive career just because of the way he plays. Zion Williamson, shelf life, in my opinion, and maybe I'll be wrong, is a very short one, a short window. And so, the Pistons are set up, if they do it right, they could have a 6, 8, 10-year run of really high-level success.
No, yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think Cade is going to be their franchise player. I think he's already their franchise player, the face of the franchise. I think he kind of took that bull by the horn instantly. I think he pretty much, without stepping on toes and without coming off as a diva, I think he did it in the most perfect way, and the way a real leader does, of coming into the locker room and coming into the franchise and just the personality and the way he handled himself and letting everybody know, hey, this is my team. I'm going to help you guys get better. I'm going to help this franchise get better, but I'm going to be the one that leads us there. And everyone kind of just went along. Everyone just bought in, and everyone's went along with that. And I think, and I've said this multiple times, I want to get your thoughts on this. I think Cade was like the most perfect person the Pistons could have drafted to be their franchise player. Like, go over the last 10 first-round picks. I think combined with his personality and his leadership and how he handles himself on and off the court, I think the Pistons got the best person for their franchise. A guy who I don't believe is going to be wanting out of Detroit or requesting trades after 3-4 years if things don't work out right. He has a crew of guys as trainer who have already integrated themselves in the Pistons community, are constantly talking with fans, constantly active in the Pistons community on Twitter. Cade completely has bought into the city of Detroit. By all accounts, loves the city, talked glowingly about the city beforehand. You constantly see him, bring his teammates around to playoff games, to summer league games, to constantly working out with them in the summer. Like, he just seems like the perfect type of leader and a guy who's going to buy in to what the franchise is selling and buy into this city, and is patient and knows what it takes to build the team. Do you see the same thing I'm saying, or do you think that that's a little too much?
No, I completely agree. And, if you go back to our conversations a lot, and I think we talked about failures of previous GMs, in that typically you have to overpay to get people to come to Detroit. With the only exception I can think of that is back when they were in their championship window, Antonio McDyess took a discount to come try to win a championship. I can't think of another player whoever was market value, a really good player who came to Detroit at less than that. So I think Troy Weaver, back to our earlier comments, really understood that you had to do this from the draft, and with trades, and he has done that. And Cade Cunningham embraced Detroit from the moment. I think everybody who has ever become a star in Detroit falls in love with the fan base. Doesn't matter the sport. Even I see that Matthew Stafford jersey on the back.
Yes,
I think
sir.
Matthew Stafford still loves Detroit fans and what they were doing. So, I think Cade Cunningham wanted to be here. He wanted to be that number one. He wanted the pressure. And to that, basketball wise, I love just his feel for the game. He might have 3.5 quarters of average basketball, but I'm sure more so than I. His crunch time numbers are incredible. And that to me just shows what he's capable of. And as this game slows down for him and he learns even better how to get to his spots, he's going to be incredible.
No, yeah, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about his pace, is that I think that has a lot to do with it. He never gets sped up. A lot of times with rookies in the NBA, you see them get, sped up. Like you mentioned, he has great pace. He never lets a defense speed him up. He never lets a defense fluster him. Even when he comes down, there's a few times he had some bad turnovers this past season, but he'll come right back down unshaken, not scared or anything. He doesn't let that affect him. He comes right back down and makes a great play. So I think that has a big part to do with it, but also the fact that, again, it just seems like he wants those moments, like you mentioned. He wants the pressure. He's not afraid of failing or missing. Like, he wants this pressure, and he thinks he can do it. And a lot of times he did, especially after, I believe, February. He was like at the top of the league in crunch time scoring. So he was exceptional this past season. I think he should have won Rookie of the Year. But either way, I think the Pistons have a franchise guy finally after many years of not really having one and trying to force guys into that role that weren't really set for that role. I think he is by far, like, obviously Troy Weaver has done a good job around other parts and getting other players and other young talent, freeing up the books, all that thing. But the big thing was lucking into Cade Cunningham. If they could have all this stuff, and without Cade Cunningham, we'd still be sitting here saying, okay, well, they're still missing this thing. And I don't think people would be as high on the Pistons if they didn't have a Cade Cunningham. But the fact that they were able to luck into Cade, and he made the selection of Cade Cunningham over Jalen Green or Evan Mobley, I think people see how exciting the Pistons' future is going to be, and they're really high on it. One thing I actually do want to ask you about, though, is how do you feel about the surrounding pieces around Cade? Right now, I had Ryan Field. I'm sure you know who Ryan Field is, who used to do the Fox Sports sideline report. Basically was Johnny Kane before Johnny Kane. I had him on, and he was talking about the pieces around Cade Cunningham, and we talked about it a little bit. I kind of want to get what you feel. do you think they have guys that will be on this roster in 3 to 4 years, or do you think that these guys will be used, like you mentioned earlier, in trades? I've kind of talked about that being a possibility before, that, you're stacking that treasure chest of assets because a team like Detroit in a small market, like you mentioned, doesn't have a history of attracting top free agents. Now, maybe it changes. Maybe somehow it changes because Cade is a superstar and guys want to come play with Cade. Maybe that happens. I don't know. But the vast majority of the Pistons history say that will not happen. So do you see that? I can see two different pathways. I want to know where you think this could go. I can see these guys that Troy Weaver has around him. He continues to add more to it in next year's stacked draft class. And these guys this is kind of the team that is going to build together and eventually be that team in like 3 years from now, once they're all in kind of towards their prime and developed and stuff. That's the team you have moving forward with some minor moves on the outside with some signings or whatever. Or do you see in 3 years a lot of these guys just not being on the team and a lot of them being used in a trade for a bigger name player to play with Cade?
Yeah, so that's when I was talking about Troy Weaver, this is what I think set up perfectly. I think, is it possible that this team is kind of the assembled team, the first Golden State Warriors championship that was built homegrown? I think that's possible if Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren really click, in the first 2 or 3 years. I think all probability, when you look at it, if you look at the whole roster up and down, if they're healthy, they have very few untradeable pieces. I mean, even go like Kelly Olynyk. If he's healthy and playing decent, there's going to be a contender who wants that 5 guy who can shoot a 3 and play make a little bit off the bench. And so I think just based on Troy Weaver, I think likely there's going to be a trade. And I actually had this conversation. I had some of my graduating players over today, and we were talking about it. And I said, you know what, I wouldn't be surprised in the next year or two to see some of these pieces, mainly probably Sadiq Bey and some of their draft capital, moved for that third piece that all the championship teams have. And I like Sadiq Bey a lot, but you have to give up something to get something in return. And he's, probably you're not giving up Cade Cunningham. You're likely not giving up Jaden Ivey. So your next, biggest piece is him. And so I like him. I think he's a really good NBA player, and he could easily contribute to an NBA team. But I think he's likely the one that you're going to see moved to get that piece when Troy Weaver's ready to go.
I think a lot of fans, I think this is going to be an argument had for a while, because a lot of fans, and I tell you, Coach Smith, a lot of fans are in love with Sadiq Bey. You say anything negative about Sadiq Bey, they come to your house with pitchforks and just ready to get you out of there. But I think this is kind of something that was talked about last year, kind of talked about a little bit at the beginning of the offseason. I think it's going to continue to be talked about. I think you're right that if they do take that route of, okay, we're going to trade some of these pieces, some of these assets to try to go all in and get this third guy, I don't think they do that now. Obviously, they don't have the roster for it, but when they're ready for it, I do agree that Sadiq probably is the guy that does it, because Sadiq, he played really well this past season and proved me wrong, because I didn't think that he would be able to do what he did in the last 56 games of the season, where he started to look a little bit better, putting the ball on the ground, more decisive, reading the game a little bit better, using his physicality to draw more free throws. He went from averaging like 1.7 free throws a game to like 3.9 a game in the last 56 games of the season. That's a big jump. So he proved me wrong. I love Sadiq Bey. And people try to paint me out as a hater because I say what I'm about to say coming up, but I really like Sadiq. Though, like you said, I think he is the piece that if a trade is to happen, he's going to be the key piece to get I saw someone talk about during the season, like a Jaylen Brown, like when the Celtics were struggling and they're like, oh, should they split them up? Like Sadiq is the main piece in a trade like that. You're not, Isaiah Stewart's not carrying the value to do that. Killian Hayes isn't carrying the value to do that. You're not probably trading Jaden Ivey or Cade. And you're probably not trading Jalen Duren either. So it feels like that Sadiq, if they take that trade route, he would be the main piece along with some probably draft capital around it to get that next piece. Though I do see a possible chance, like you mentioned, for this team, if they do try it, to try to build a championship team straight from this development, from these young guys, and adding to it with more young guys in next year's draft, and just letting them grow together, learn how to play together. I could see that happening. It just depends on how, like you mentioned, how quickly it takes these Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, heck, even Isaiah Stewart, Sadiq, and Killian. How long it takes all those guys to really get up to speed, if some of those guys are ever going to get up to speed, for them to decide if that's the route that they really want to take it. But when we come back, I actually want to ask you one more thing about the Pistons young core. Then we're going to get into how is it to coach? Like when you were my coach, you were my favorite coach. I think you know that. You were my favorite coach from high school. But looking back on it, man, and seeing some of the players you've had since then, how do you do it? And what's so cool about it and all that stuff? We're going to get into all of that when we come back. But first, I have to tell you guys about some of our sponsors. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to our YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Best way to support the podcast, hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. Or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. All right, Coach, I kind of want to ask you, before we get into your coaching, and I actually will ask you a little bit about your playing days when you went to college and played. But before we get to that, it wasn't going to be right if I didn't ask you something that I know me and you would get in a disagreement about. Because me, I know for a fact me and you will disagree about this. I wonder if you in your head already know where I'm going with this. So obviously we both really like Cade. Cade's great. Sadiq, he's good. He's gonna be fine. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Isaiah Stewart, but I think that you probably are a fan of Isaiah Stewart based on how he plays his motor. I think you probably have a cap on his ceiling, but I think you probably like his motor. So I think you probably are okay with him. There's one player that I know me and you are going to disagree on immediately, and that's Killian Hayes. I actually think you texted me about him. His rookie season, I think, at the end of his rookie season, I think you texted me about him. What are your thoughts right now about Killian Hayes?
I think that text, just so everybody can get an appreciation for, is I trust Troy Weaver talent evaluation going back to OKC and that, but I mean, what did he see in Killian Hayes? It was kind of to draft him 6th overall. I think was kind of my text, and then we can go back and forth. To people who've heard us disagree a lot today, what they need to be aware of is we used to literally get in yelling arguments over Pistons conversations, which is, unbelievable. Now we kind of see the game very similarly. But then 5-8 years ago, it was not that way. But to Killian, I love what he brings defensively. And, it's just there's nothing defensively that ever, to me, looks like an NBA skill. Like, I want to attribute, like, if he could be a Rajon Rondo. He's got vision. He can pass the ball. But he's no threat to finish even around the rim. And so he's a disruptor defensively. He's a guy you could literally, him and Cade and Jaden Ivey in the backcourt. Like, if he had any offensive game, man, could that be special defensively? But I mean, maybe you'll have an idea of somebody, but what does he hang his hat on offensively that doesn't allow the teams, even Rondo, like when he didn't have the right team around him, could easily be guarded and didn't do it. I just don't see a way. He doesn't finish well. His right hand is weak as far as NBA players go. He can't catch and shoot threes. He doesn't have a floater game. And not to say he can't improve, but he has nothing in terms of scoring at any level that is an NBA skill right now.
All right, so everyone listening is probably like, yeah, go ahead, get him. But all right, so I really like Killian Hayes. I think everybody who listens to the podcast knows. I think I told you that I like Killian Hayes when you texted me. So I agree that he struggles right now offensively. Obviously, that's very clear. However, I think that one, like you mentioned, he's a pest defensively, and I really think that there was a clip I retweeted the other day of him like literally guarding 5 players on a singular possession this past season, and I for real think that he has like all NBA guard defensive potential. Like, that's how good I think he was defensively. Especially he can switch down too, because he put on like 15 pounds of muscle last offseason. He can switch on to bigger guys and hold his own too. I really like him on the defensive end. I think he's an incredible passer. I think he has incredible vision. However, like you mentioned, in order to be able to utilize your vision and your passing ability, you have to have some kind of leverage and threat as a scorer, or guys the passing lanes aren't going to be open. So he has to improve as a scorer. My argument for Killian Hayes, and then we'll move on to talking about your coaching, but my argument for Killian Hayes is, one, that he's only played 92 career games. He's barely finished just this past season, the last like week and a half of the season when he finished a complete rookie season. He dealt with that hip injury, and Amari Sankofa of the Detroit News, or Amari Sankofa II of the Detroit News, actually put out an article. It was after Killian got taken to the bench this past season I think it was when he hurt his thumb again, and then he came back. They put him on the bench in like February. After then, his finishing around the rim was much better. His at rim frequency of shots taken around the rim was, I think it was up like 20%. So he looked, I thought, towards the end of the season, and after he started coming off the bench, I thought he looked much more aggressive. I think he improved as a finisher around the rim. For me, I feel like what's wrong with Killian, I think it's more, and we'll see what happens this season. I think this will be his last season to really prove it for the Pistons. I think it's about his aggressiveness and his confidence to continue to go to the rim and continue to look for his own shot. I think too often he doesn't look for his own shot, and he passes up opportunities he shouldn't be passing up. For example, the last 13 games of the season, he shot 44% from the field, and he was averaging 10 points a game with 4.3 assists, 3.8 rebounds, and 1.7 steals. It's not all-star numbers or anything, but if I told you that was Killian Hayes' number for his entire second season, everyone would be like, okay, that was an incredible jump for him. That was a big jump for him. So I think, and I don't think it was a coincidence that kind of started happening around where it would be like, okay, second season worth of games. Like once he got around the 80 career games and went on, it started to look like he was starting to understand it a little bit more, get more aggressive going to the rim. So that's how I feel about Killian. I like Killian because I think that if he does simply add catch and shoot, let's say if he adds a catch and shoot, I think he could be like a Lonzo Ball kind of archetype. If he's able to finish around the rim and utilize that, I think he can be a really good guard. I think he has too much basketball IQ and too much raw skill for him not to plan out. Other guys that I've been high on, like Stanley Johnson, there was some stuff off the court that happened with him, and his work ethic just wasn't great, apparently. Killian Hayes and Sekou Doumbouya was just a prospect from the get-go. Killian, it's just so hard for me to see Killian not figuring things out because he has too much IQ and he has too much raw talent to me for him not to find something. But that's where I'm at with Killian. I don't want to drag on too long, but if you want to respond to that, you can. Then we'll talk about your coaching.
I just real quick. I mean, if you told me he became a serviceable NBA player, I would not be shocked at all. If you told me he was a playoff level starting point guard for a team, that would shock me.
Fair enough. It seems like that's where a lot of people are at this point. He definitely going to be a big season for Killian Hayes this upcoming season. This is going to be it right here. We'll see what happens, man. I'm high on Killian. You guys know that. And I know a lot of you guys are going to be like, why are you always bringing up Killian on the podcast? I haven't brought up Killian in a minute, and I had to because Coach Smith texted me, but I had to bring it up and talk about it on the podcast. I had to get a disagreement going at some point. All right, Coach. To wrap up the podcast, I know you went to college and played basketball. You went, obviously, to the same high school that I went to, and you coached me at Chippewa Valley. You played there for 4 years, obviously. You played underneath Coach Voss, who was my varsity coach. And then you went on to play college basketball, came back, was my JV coach, and now you've taken over as the varsity coach at the high school. I guess what my question it kind of encompasses everything I want to ask you is that your basketball career has lasted from like early 2000s all the way to now. How has the game changed for a coach? Like, I feel like some of the things that, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of the things that you would teach a high school coup 6 years ago, or actually, how long ago? It was 9 years ago now? 9 years ago, maybe you wouldn't teach kids nowadays, or maybe there'd be more things that you teach nowadays to kids. Has the way the game has changed from a, I guess, I mean, offense and defensive standpoint, has that changed how you go about teaching kids? And you know, now that you're on the varsity level teaching, you're not just teaching kids, you're teaching guys who are future college prospects, future college players. Has it changed how you go about teaching these guys the game?
I mean, there are certain things I try to stay up to date with current trends in the game, but you know, like if I kind of go back to when I started, I was a little ahead of this read and react type basketball. It was my way of playing, and you know, the spacing. You know, I played small college basketball. I was no superstar. I got there on two simple skills that I was incredible at. I was incredibly smart and gifted that way, and I could shoot the basketball. And so, when I was playing, I saw the game at a different level than most of the players I was playing at the D3 level with. But I couldn't do the things that a lot of those guys could do athletically. And so that's where I was inhibited by. But so coming to coaching, I just want to teach the game of basketball. I am not, and you know this, I'm not a drill sergeant. I'm not getting you on the end line. Your goal is to play hard. If you don't do that, that we're not going to be successful. If I can't get my team to buy in to playing hard, they don't need to scare me. They don't need to fear me as a coach. They need to know they can respect my opinions. And the reason I'm telling them something is because it has. I almost always will say, we're going to use this type green in this situation. Why? What if the defender does this? So every coaching comes with a piece of why we do that, why we're doing this way. Why are we doing this monotonous drill this way? And there's always a reason why we do that. And I think that has worked tremendously well throughout my coaching career at getting player buy-in. And, just to real quick and talk about that, you and I and the guys you play with, we're still close. We're going to get together this summer. I've been blessed, and I don't know if it's me or the players that come through our program at just building relationships. And like earlier today, my seniors from this past season were over. We swam in the pool, we barbecued, we had played some yard games. And I think that's what, at this level, high school coaching, that's what it's about.
Yeah, and I kind of want to go back to what you said about you being a little bit ahead of your time with something. I'll kind of back that up. Yeah, I remember initially I think it was like one of our first practices on JV. This was back in I can't remember, was it 2013 or 14? I was on the team, whichever one. I remember it was like one of the first practices. You were like instilling our offense. And it was basically 4 out, 1 in. And we just went side to side. A cutter went through. After you passed it, you cut through. And you kept the floor space with one guy inside. And I think that was before like the Warriors really like took over the NBA, and everyone was just shooting threes, and everybody was just worried about, spacing the floor. I mean, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, the Pistons had Josh Smith, Greg Monroe, and Andre Drummond on the same team on the floor at the same time. Like that was, if you did that in today's NBA, you'd get laughed off the floor. You'd get fired immediately after the game. Like it would be insane. So I will back you up with that. That's true. And there's one more question I want to ask you, and then we'll wrap up the podcast. Is that, and I know what your answers are going to be, but this past year, obviously, what was the past few years you have coached? What have you guys won districts, and what year did you guys win districts?
We won districts both the last 2 years. And we shared the league title this year with our crosstown rival, Dakota High School. So it was our first league title since 2011.
Okay, so and then also just a real quick shout out, Ryan Rollins, who went to Dakota, just got a 3-year contract. Oh no, it was a 4-year. No, it's 3-year contract, 2 years guaranteed with the Golden State Warriors. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, he's incredible.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. But what I wanted to ask you was, I came to a few games this year and watched you coach this team you had, and I'm gonna call you out on something real quick.
All right.
I think, and then we'll wrap up the podcast. But I just had to call you out real quick on something. You had a player by the name. I'm gonna give this guy a free shout out here. I'm sure he may appreciate this. You have a guy on your team. His name was Devin Little, right?
Lilly. Lilly.
You had Devin Lilly on your team, and he was your guys' best player. I think a lot of people who watched would say. Now, Coach, I saw him take some shots, and I saw you allow him to do some freelance stuff. I just don't know if you would have allowed some people to do back in the day. What do you have to say about that kind of thing?
I think I'd agree with you. You evolve as a coach, and so one of the things I've learned is there is a give and take with the freedom you give a player. Devin was incredible as a high school player. He could score on all 3 levels. And we did work on, especially between his junior and senior year, on the range he was shooting threes at, which I thought as a junior, he shot way too many deep threes. But in the same regard, like, he's not somebody you wanted to script things. He had innate ability to create space and get shots off. And sometimes were they bad shots? Yes. But we did well when the ball was in his hands. He really improved as a passer between his junior and senior year. And, you know, there is a give and take there where you're frustrating a guy and they come back wondering, is this a good shot or a bad shot? And then all of a sudden you look at a guy, he's like, how did this guy who could really knock down shots not all of a sudden be able not to shoot at all? It's because they don't know what's a good shot and what's a bad shot. And so, you know, probably is there some shots that we could have pulled back? Yeah, I'm sure there are. But, you know, in some sense, you got to let your players play too.
You know,
for example, let me give him one last shout out. This is nothing. We got in the district, first game in districts, and we had played very poorly all game. It's a tie game. There's 11 seconds to go in the game. The other team, Utica, had just tied the game. They're celebrating. We both have a timeout, Utica and Chippewa. Neither one of us choose to use it. Devin has the ball at the top of the key, one-on-one with a defender. I'm not calling a timeout. I didn't even call a play. I just told everybody to get away from him. And he was able to create a shot and hit a shot with 1 second to go, a little 12-foot pull-up jump shot, knocked it down smooth as silk to win the game. Now, did I do anything as a coach other than allow him to shoot a shot he had practiced lots and lots of times? I allowed that. And the freedom I think that he had allowed him to shoot that shot with confidence and knock it down.
All right, so fair enough. I would thought your answer was going to be, well, if you guys were more skilled, I would have let you do it. I thought that was going to be your answer, but fair enough. Devin's going on to play college. Where at?
He's at Delta Community College just outside of Saginaw.
Okay, fair enough. I just want to give him a shout out since we talked about him. Might as well give him a shout out there. And then this will be the final thing I ask, because we really are going a little bit longer than I wanted to go, and my bosses are going to come at me again and be like, "Ooh, you got to cut the podcast down a little bit." But if you had to give advice to anyone listening to the podcast who is interested in coaching at the high school, college level, what would be your one piece of advice for them?
You know what? Coaching is a calling. You got to be willing to put in the work, and you got to do it for the right reasons. If you really want to be able to maintain coaching into a level, it's got to be done because you care about those who you coach for. And if you do that and you walk into the gym, and I'm going to be honest here, when I came out of high school or college playing, I thought I knew everything, but my coaching trajectory took off the moment I realized I didn't know everything, that there were a whole lot of people I could learn from who knew a heck of a lot more about the game than I do. And I saw, you know, I use my Twitter as a way of finding drills, new plays, new concepts, new ways of connecting with my basketball players. And that has served me really well the moment I realized that I could learn a lot more from other people than I could teach people.
Absolutely, man. I absolutely love that message. That's a message I've said to people before. As soon as you realize you're not the smartest man in the room, that's when you become smart. That right there is when you get better. So, but anyways, thank you, Coach, for coming on, man. I had a lot of fun. We're definitely going to have you back on the podcast at some point. I'll probably bring you back on some point during the season to rehash what we talked about here. But I appreciate you coming on, man. Make sure you guys go follow my coach over at CVHS Basketball on Twitter. Go follow him over there. Show some support to the program. Thank you for coming on again. Thank you guys for listening and making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button at the Locked On Pistons YouTube channel, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. And until next time, the next episode will be with a fan. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you want to be on the Fan Joins episode, again, send me your best Piston fandom story, and I'll pick the most interesting one from each week. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace out, everybody, and stay safe.